Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Patti Ashley here in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm excited to interview our guest today for the Fear to Love to Grace Summit. She's an author and an inspirational speaker, internationally best-selling author, coach, and she's written 7 books, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Motherless Daughters. And she's working on a new book now called The After Grief. And so I'm excited to chat with her today and find out more about all this wonderful work in the world that she's doing. Hope Edelman, welcome.
Thank you, Patty.
So glad to spend some time with you today.
Terrific to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So your work is so rich in the depth of love and loss. Tell me a little bit about what inspired you on your path.
Well, I was 17 when my mother died of breast cancer. That was in 1981. And that I refer to that now as the dark ages of grief support, because there was just nothing. I mean, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, all of that were the dark ages, but the 80s as well. And there just wasn't anything available for my family, certainly nothing for children. And because I was 17 and I could drive, I had a little bit of independence, I would go to bookstores and look for books about mother loss. And all of the books I found assumed that you would be in your 40s or 50s when your mom died. There was almost like an erasure of the experience of those of us who'd been younger. And it's not statistically as common as losing a parent when you're an adult, or losing your dad even. So I didn't know any other girls. And it took me about 10 years, but then I just decided to write the book myself, the book that I needed, in effect.
Yeah, no, you're right. I have several clients who've lost their moms at an early age like that. And it's pretty complex in terms of what happens. Because I think one of the things that I hear is, but if only I had some time, to talk about the things that happened to us, when I was growing up, then maybe I would feel better, like having some resolution to, the teenage. It's hard too in the teenage years, right? Because that's the whole developmental time of pulling away from our parents. And so developmentally, I walked through a 16-year-old watch her mom die of Lou Gehrig's disease years ago. Wow. And the conflict of, her wanting developmentally not to really be in relationship with mom, but knowing that she would lose her, right?
Right. Well, what we're hoping is that it will be a temporary separation while we form our own identities, and then we will come back and have an adult relationship with the mom. But the separation becomes permanent when it happens during the teenage years. And the opportunity to reunite in your early adulthood, or typically early to mid 20s, has to be done in a one-sided nature. And that's possible, but hard and lonely. And you need the support of a therapist or a community of women who've been there, ideally, to help you through that.
And you do retreats with women around just that, correct?
I do. I started co-leading retreats in 2016, and now I run the company, and 26 women at a time come to the retreats. We have early loss retreats. We did a first retreat for women who were just in their 20s when their moms died. And that this year, and next year we're going international. We are having a retreat in Toronto in April, looking into expanding elsewhere. But yes, very, very powerful weekends. 4 days, 3 nights, all the women together, and we open up the box and we look at what's inside, and then we decide what we want to put back in and what we'd like to leave out moving forward.
Great. And we'll have that up on our site when we launch in February. And that's great resources for our viewers out there.
Yes, it's just motherlessdaughters.com. The 2020 calendar is going up right now. There are also one-day workshops as well.
Okay, great. So I realized how losing my dad when I was a kid at 11 really impacted me.
Right.
I know this is a big, vague question, but how do you think that, what advice, and I don't like the word advice either, to the motherless daughters or those of us who've lost our parents at an early age, what's a sweet piece of wisdom that you can share with us? Maybe that's better than advice, right?
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to know that a child can only grieve to the best of their cognitive and emotional ability at that particular time in their life, right? You were 11. So what was going on for you at 11? What was your relationship with your dad like? What did you understand about death? Had you lost anybody before? What was your personality like? Right.
Well, my dad, yeah, dad was my best friend. He was my
Mm-hmm.
biggest ally. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a big loss for me, right at the brink of adult,
Right.
pre-puberty, when you really are
Right.
starting to think about relationships. So it definitely impacted how I do relationships. Right?
And what makes grief a lifelong process, I think, is that because we can only grieve to the best of our ability at any time, that means we need to constantly revisit and reassess, and revise our relationship to the facts of that loss.
Mm-hmm.
I see women all the time who come to the retreats for a couple of different reasons, but one big reason is that they're on the brink of a big life transition. They're about to get married, or they're pregnant and about to become a mom, or they're about to have an age correspondence event. They're about to turn the age their mom was when she died, or their child is about to turn the age they were when their mom died. And it's bringing up all kinds of feelings and thoughts, new thoughts or insights about the loss. And they come because they feel that it's unresolved, right? Or they didn't finish grieving in the past, or they must have suppressed it. And I invite them to consider that differently and say, no, it's not that you didn't grieve properly in the past, or that you repressed it. It's that this is how it happens. You can't grieve being a mom without your mom until you're a mom without your mom. You can't really understand what it meant to die at 42, for example, as my mom was. I couldn't understand that until I was 42. I just couldn't do that work at 41. I had to turn 42 to really understand the impact of what that had meant to her.
Yeah.
Even more so than to me or our family. And I had a grief reaction, which for us, I think is completely expected and even normal or normative for our population. Mm-hmm. But it looks strange and aberrant to everybody else who thinks, well, it was so long ago. Didn't you get over it yet?
I know. And that's the thing. That's the thing that gets me the most. And, we're launching today on February 4th, which is the 50th anniversary of my father's death.
Is that right? Oh, what an amazing tribute to your dad, Patti.
Yeah, thank you. Now, see, I want to cry. Talk about grief. I mean, it's just 50 years and it's still there, because when Kelly and I were talking about doing it the first of 2020, and I looked, well, we don't want to do January because, holiday, everybody's crashing from the holidays. Let's look at February. And I did the math and I went, synchronicity at its best.
Yep.
And, as much as I'm grieving the loss of my partner, which was today, actually, speaking of anniversary dates, is the fifth anniversary of our first date.
Oh, gosh.
My partner passed away, and he died exactly 2 years after our first date. Well, shortly. So November is not a great month for me. But you're right. And I so appreciate that, because people, and I think that was the big thing as a kiddo, even I was told I was in 6th grade, go back to school. And why can't I pay attention to the reading on the walls? We were literally doing these, I think they were called SRA or something readers, where you had to read and I got a pink note for not paying attention in class.
Right.
So that hurry up and get over it was a big piece of what I was trying to do, and I couldn't, which is why I ended up doing the work I do. And then seeing it with Lawrence and really wanting to understand that, I think that's the biggest piece. I loved what you said about different experiences that happen in our lives. We can't grieve until we're there.
Yeah, we can't. There is this, I describe it as an insidious cultural imperative to hurry up and move on. And rush through whatever internal process we have. And I think about kids who, my mom died in the summer, so I didn't have to go right back to school. But I've heard from so many adults who were bereaved as children and went to school the next day, or, because the adults didn't know what else to do with them. Mm-hmm. And because children were believed to be resilient, and they would bounce back quickly. And I think, how do you go back, just step right back into the world that existed before your mom died or dad died, knowing what you know now and seeing what you've seen, and not have anyone to help guide you through that transition? This is why a lot of kids just sort of stuff it down.
Yeah.
because they're looking at the adults around them who are trying to act like everything's normal. And they think, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do too. And then when it shows up 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, we think, what's going on here? You know, if we're able to connect the dots and say, I know this is related to this early loss that went unattended, right, and unaddressed, then we can go and get resources to help us, hopefully, you know, if we have access to them. But if your mom died or dad died when you were 6 or 7 and it shows up in a big way when you're 15 or 16 and you're still dependent on the adults around you and they don't see the connection, you're kind of lost a second time. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And it touches me to hear you say that, because you're kindred spirit, and you know, my work and your work in terms of, that's my message for sure. And even, you know, what popped in my mind was the idea of, I've heard parents come in and say, well, you know, she lost her mother at 2 and so she's not going to remember, you know. Yeah, I know. And I'm like, oh no, yes, she is. Or even an infant, and you know, an infant's not going to remember.
My Facebook authors page right now is filled with women who are talking about the messages they heard about grieving when they were young, especially the ones that they found in retrospect least helpful and most damaging. And there's a thread there of women who were very young when their moms died, who said the messages that you were so young you don't remember her, it's a blessing,
right?
were terrible for them, because it's terrible that they don't remember her. I work with women all the time who were so young they don't have memories of their mom. And that's a very special category. You know, that's a specific kind of loss, to be grieving the loss of something you don't, or someone you don't remember, and having to piece her together as a person who, you know, constitutes half of your DNA without any conscious memories of her. At every Motherless Daughters retreat, there's a subgroup of women who were very young when their moms died, and we have special activities for that group, because their loss is significantly, in some ways, they were in that way different from the rest of the groups. And we want to acknowledge that and validate that as something very real. But you know, what I find is that any message that begins with the words, at least, ... is probably not going to be a helpful message. You know, at least you didn't know her, so or you don't remember her, so you as if that's going to make grieving easier somehow.
Right. I know Brene Brown has a great video on sympathy and empathy, and that's what she says is the one thing you never want to say is at least.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but we do that, don't we? Because here's the thing: we think we're helping people by trying to make it better and take it away, instead of going through the empathy and witnessing. And that's such a gift. I even found, you know, as a therapist with tons of friends that are therapists and in the field, the challenge of me finding those witnesses that could sit with me and let me cry, and let me tell the stories, and let me be with it without trying to fix it, you know.
Exactly. And you know, that is, I'm seeing the next wave of grief support is where it's going. You know, the work of Megan Devine also, I don't know if you're familiar with her, and Refuge in Grief, is about not trying to fix people, because we're not broken. I mean, our hearts are broken right now, but broken in the, you know, the metaphorical sense, right? We're not broken. We don't need to be fixed. We need to be witnessed. You know, we need companionship. Historically, in the past, grief was done as a community event. You know, it was a communal experience, and we've lost that in the past 150 years, really. Yes. So that it became a very private, internal, individual experience. I don't think it was ever meant to be that. Yeah. And we're left, and that's why we're often feeling so bereft and lonely, right? But just having someone in companionship to sit with you and say, wow, this is really hard. I'm just here to listen. You know, I'm here to talk.
And tell me stories about him. I think that was the thing and people get so uncomfortable, because they're, I don't want to remind you of it. I'm like I'm going to forget. And the way I feel connected is to tell you the stories. So.
Right. Or I don't want to upset you by mentioning, you know, your deceased mother or father, as if we're not thinking about them all the time anyway, right? It's not going to be an intrusive request. I hear from people around Mother's Day a lot about, you know, how can I make my mom part of Mother's Day, or how can I support someone who is grieving the loss of their mom? You know, I hear sometimes from friends or relatives saying, my niece or my best friend or my girlfriend is about to experience her first Mother's Day without her mom. What can I do to support her? And often the question is, what can I plan that will distract her from the day?
Yeah.
As if that's possible. I mean, momentarily, I'm sure you can come up with activities that will take her mind off it for a period of time. But I say, the best thing you can do is say, hey, I'm acknowledging that this is a day that might be bringing some stuff up for you. Let's talk about your mom. Tell me a story about her.
Yeah.
Because people often want to talk about the people that we've loved and lost. Mm-hmm. We're waiting for permission a lot of the time. And so give them permission to talk about someone that they love who's not here. That's what helps people feel connected. And that can be incredibly healing. It's not good for everyone. Some people might say, I really don't want to talk about that today, which is fine too. Then just don't push for it. Yeah. But, let them know there's an opening there if they want to avail themselves of it. And then listen and, and share in the moment of remembering that person together.
Right. And what I've learned, because my next book is on shame, and I'm looking at the neurobiology of shame, and I'm looking at mirror neurons and how empathy involves feeling with the other. And so that was the big aha for me was, I don't like this feeling of grief at all. Who does? It's horrible. Yeah. And yet what I learned from losing my father is the importance of being with it in order to move through it instead of going around it.
Right.
So what I needed was people to witness that. And so what I realized is, if I have an enlightened witness with me, that person is feeling that. Mm-hmm. And because we live in a culture that wants to hurry up and get better, it makes people very fidgety and
yes.
I'm feeling something and I want to make my friend feel better. And yes. It's really hard to be in empathy with another human being. And it's such a gift to find those people that can do that for us.
It is. And it's living in an environment that doesn't have enough empathy in it that often leads to those feelings of shame. I am guessing that you, like me, don't believe that grief happens in discrete stages. Right. And I call them elements of grief. In fact, it's like alphabet soup, they're all thrown in there together and we'll pluck one out or, one will be more dominant on a day or in a particular hour than another. But I've identified like 30 elements of grief. And that's not by any means an exhaustive list. That's like almost off the top of my head, but shame is one of them. And I don't think there's nearly enough discussed right now about the connections between grief and shame, because shame can develop for all sorts of reasons. One being that you're trying to fit your experience into an ill-fitting model that everyone is telling you it should fit into, and it doesn't. So you feel aberrant and ashamed of that. Or when you're a kid, you might be the only one that without a dad or without a mom, and it makes you different. And that can also lead to feelings of shame, right? So it's really important that you're writing this book. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will talk more about that I'm interested to hear in all of your elements of grief. Which book is that in? Is that in one of your books? Is that coming up in the after grief? Or?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great.
It is. Yes, because some of those only show up over time, right? And the elements of grief are not all what we would consider negative emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, there can be appreciation and gratitude and humility, right? These are all long-term effects of bereavement, or can be, but they don't generally show up right away. And there are others that show up right away that we don't often talk about, like relief. Sometimes we feel relieved that someone's no longer suffering, right? Or over time, we can feel relieved that this person isn't here for a certain reason, whether it's to see something that would have upset them or, have an experience that would have been difficult for them. And that can be part of the long-term experience as well.
And I see it so much as a paradox, because there's both and. There's two opposites existing together. There's the human grief, and then there's the element of all the other things you're talking about, the gratitude and the grace, which is a question I'm going to ask you in a minute about.
Yes.
Just these elements of, for me, connecting to something greater than myself, or whatever blessing I got. The work I do came from losing my father. I, may or may not have become a therapist had that not happened. Right. So it's always both and that's the other thing about our culture, is we want to split and make it all good or all bad. And so I think that creates more, Carl Jung says, what we resist persists and often grows stronger. So those of us who are trying to resist the grief,
Right.
kind of hold more of it in our body and have a harder time getting to these other
Right.
places of joy and gratitude and blessing that actually is all part of it, right?
Right. 100%. And in the bereavement community that I'm part of, we call that two truths, holding two truths.
Oh,
That it can be true that you had a really hard childhood and that things are difficult, some certain things are difficult for you today as a result of that, and that certain things in your life are really great. Both things can be true,
yeah. And it's
right?
hard for people to be able to hold both. And
It is,
so
because you're
important.
right. You know, we sort of gravitate toward the simplistic and the binary, and some experiences just don't fit into that model. Like I was saying, I do a lot of work with women because I'm also a coach, and I work with private clients. And what I hear a lot is, I hear a lot from women whose dads really didn't show up for them after the mom died. You know, for whatever reason, the dad didn't have the tools emotionally to help the kids,
Right.
or started dating and remarried very quickly and focused on the new family. You know, there's a whole list of reasons why the dad may not have been there the way the daughter needed. But what I hear a lot is, well, my dad did the best he could, so I can't be upset or angry about it. And I said, well, why can't you be both? Why can't you have compassion for your dad and acknowledge that he did the best he could with whatever skills and tools he had, and also be angry and upset that he was the adult and he didn't give you what you needed as a kid? It
Right.
doesn't mean that that has to, you know, color your relationship completely, but you're allowed to hold those two truths side by side. Like, it's possible. The human mind and heart are very complex organs. They're capable of having more than, you know, two, or holding two, more than two constructs at once. And that's really eye-opening for some women to be able to understand. But, you know, it took me 20 years to get there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
myself.
And I know, right? It's really hard to see that because it does, because we are so linear, in our thinking. It has to be this or it has to be that, instead of,
Right.
well, what if it could be both? What if,
Right. Why can't it be both?
yeah.
Where's the law that says it can't be both?
Yeah.
I haven't read that yet. It's not on the books.
Right, right, right. My experience of losing my father and then losing my partner, actually, talk about dates. My partner died when I was 58 years old, which is the age my father was.
Oh, wow.
He died.
Wow.
Very strange. Because a lot of
Yeah.
times people talk about when you survive your parents, you probably heard this, when you get to the age that they were when they passed,
Yeah.
there's this kind of, whoa, I made it. And how many more years do I have? So to lose Lawrence that year was also another real significant piece of the stories that seem so similar. They both died the same way. They were both found on the living room floor of a sudden heart attack. They both were incredibly kind men in my life, like the dearest, sweetest
Yeah.
men. And I know you mentioned there's this sometimes that, what do you call it, when the stories kind of are similar in grief?
Yeah. That there's a revisiting of the original loss in a way that is so specific. It doesn't seem coincidental almost, it's like
Right.
we are being asked to experience a similar situation from a really different perspective. And there are moments when that happens to me and I just think, what the heck is going on here? Like, what's the plan? Who's in charge? Because I mean, I wouldn't have chosen to lose my dad the same way that I lost my mom, for
Yeah.
anyone to have to go through that, for my siblings and I to need to witness it again, because my mom was diagnosed with very late stage breast cancer, but ultimately she died when her liver failed. And so the last few days of her life were, end stage liver failure, watching the progression of physical events.
Mm.
She was in the hospital. There was no hospice at the time. It was traumatic and confusing, and she hadn't been told how sick she was, so she didn't know what was going on. It was a terrible scene for everyone involved, and most of all her. So when my dad was diagnosed with liver cancer, my siblings and I were like, really? Like, and why does he have to now physically experience, right, what his wife, who was his only love, he never remarried, went through? But it was so different in 2005 than it had been in 1981 in every possible way.
Mm-hmm.
he was well aware of what was happening to him. He made his own decisions. He died at home with hospice, surrounded by his family. We were all there to ease him through the transition. We were supportive. It was all out in the open. And as tragic and devastating as it was to lose our dad, I think my siblings and I, because we got to experience as adults, found it incredibly healing. It healed a lot of the trauma from the past, because as terrible as it was to go through, we got to do it from an adult perspective and kind of undo some of the things that had been done really poorly when we were kids, in a way, like sort of spiritually rebalance that scale a bit. I don't know. Did you experience that at all?
Oh, totally. And that's why I wrote my book, because I really wanted to have a consciousness that I didn't have then. And again, you're right, times have changed. My dad died in 1970. So people didn't go to therapists or talk about this. It was still very taboo. My sister, I have to say, last Thanksgiving when I was getting ready, I was in the final edits of the book. I was down there talking about the book, and really have not talked to my family about my father's death because none of them really want to talk about it, which again is why I wrote the book, because I find that fascinating. But she actually found my father and ran. We lived across the street from the church, the Catholic church. I went to Catholic school and Catholic church, and she ran and interrupted mass to get the priest to come give my father last rites. I never knew that story. She just told me that story last year.
Really?
I knew, because I was 11, I was asleep when it all happened. And anyway, it's all in the book, though. It was snowing, and I heard, the school was canceled and she was in college. And so I knew that she had gone to try and find the priest. That was all I knew of the story. But she told me just last year that the mass was going on, and she goes down the middle of the church and said, Father, you have to come to my house. So yes, I mean, and even the consciousness of just having that conversation with my sister and realizing that, almost 50 years later, I'm learning something about the experience that happened in our family that no one wanted to talk about.
Yes.
So yes, I loved that story that you shared about your experience, because I think that's so important to really understand the consciousness of what is grief. And I don't think it's in that sensory area of our implicit experiences that are hard. It's hard to language. It's hard to kind of even know. And when we live in a culture that wants us to hurry up and get over it and fix it and make it better, it's quite a dance of how do we do it consciously and do it well.
Exactly. And when we're not doing it consciously, we're often still doing it somatically. The body keeps the score, and the work around, in that area is really significant. I was having a conversation just yesterday with someone who was talking about how our gut, our intestinal system is like a second brain. Mm-hmm. And that's why we talk about having gut reactions, right? Or intuition. That sometimes when our intellectual faculties are not zeroing in on something, our body is still aware of what's happening. There's quite a large body of literature about these type of anniversary events and, and age correspondence events, mm-hmm. where someone will show up at a psychiatrist's office having physical symptoms that doctors can't diagnose. And the psychiatrist will make the connection perhaps that you are about to reach or just reach the age your parent was when they died or was diagnosed. That's another big transition. And oftentimes when that conscious connection then is brought to the surface, the physical symptoms will resolve. I find those stories remarkable.
It's fascinating.
There's a lot of them.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I am always looking for anniversary dates. I had a really good friend of mine who actually wrote a book too, because she lost her husband shortly before I lost Lawrence. And she texted me this morning and she goes, "Happy anniversary." And I went, "What?" And I was like, "What's the anniversary?" And I thought, "Oh, this is the anniversary of my first date with Lawrence." And she remembered that because she was a good friend of Lawrence's. And I thought, well, no wonder I was so sad when I woke up this morning. I thought it was the holidays and Thanksgiving and, just past the anniversary day. Because November was just a bad month for me just in general. But yeah, and I was like, and I cried and I went, "Oh, thank you. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I forgot. She goes, I'm sorry. I said, no, thank you,
Yeah.
because you made it conscious for me.
Yeah.
And I realized, and then, cause I kept thinking, why was that? Why am I thinking it so much about our first date, and anniversary date. So
Right. I mean, look, my cats know when the time is to be, they can't, they don't know how to read a clock, but every day between 6:15 and 6:30, they know to start meowing for their food.
yeah,
And they must know like the angle of the light in the kitchen, or their bodies are on a clock that, makes them hungry at that. I don't know what it is, but I think, well, what makes us think that, we're so intellectually developed, we forget that we are animals, right? And we have instincts, and our body may respond at a certain time of year or a season, right? Or
mm-hmm.
even a certain time of day, and signal to us, oh, I remember that this is a time when, things were emotionally hard for me.
Yeah.
And then that'll come up again.
It's so true. I do a lot of trainings for therapists, and I make this joke all the time to my clients and to therapists, just to make light of it, that we're the only species that has to research ourselves to understand how to get along with each other. Animal kingdom
So
seems to know what they need to do.
true.
We were pretty messed up for a while, and now we have new brain research that says, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that.
Yep.
So
Oh gosh, that's so true.
yeah, so to get in touch with our sensory experience and our intuition, is all part of this work. And I think grief deepens us. And for me, it took me into that place in a way that I had to look at some things that I wouldn't have had. I had not had the experiences that I've had in my life. Right?
There's just so much that we don't know, because as a species, we are only as good as our current, measurement tools. We talk sometimes, like we go into way philosophical discussions at the retreat. Sometimes we say, we'll talk about, how do we know that we are not sharing experiences with our mothers still? I mean, half of our DNA came from her, right?
Yeah.
How do we really, how can we ever know at this point, in human development, that some of our thoughts are not thoughts that she shared, right? There are connections that, or you with your dad, there are connections that we may not even be aware of, that we're living with every day. And that can either be kind of creepy and scary, or it can be enormously comforting to think that they're still with us all the time.
I have a client who lost her father at the beginning of this year, from after he had had Alzheimer's for a few years. And she's been working with me for a long time, and she knows that I believe in all this stuff, and feeling my partner, my dad, after they passed on. And she said, I'm so mad, I just can't feel my dad, I just don't know, I don't know if he's here with me. And but we were camping, and I was up there, and I was looking, and there was this moose, and I just looked at the moose, and I was like, he really liked moose. There was something about my dad, and how do you say the plural of mooses?
Meat?
Anyway,
I think it's just moose. Yeah.
Totally missed that. That was dad. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
There he was. And she goes, so then we look up moose, and I have a book called Animal Speak, which is the Native American symbolism around animals, and I read it, and I can't remember what it said, but it was so connected to things that she could relate to with her dad. So I think it shows up in so many ways, but she was looking for it in so much that linear kind of, I want to see his ghost, I want to see him like sit in the room with me and have a conversation, instead of this, the way I think our partners or our loved ones show up in all these other ways: songs, music, little pennies from heaven, things like that.
Yes. And this is also sometimes very comforting for those who were too young when their parent died to have any conscious memories, because that parent is still with them every day, right? Their body is very familiar with that parent. Their genetics are from that and of that parent, and they're mourning the loss of, or the absence of, any kind of intellectual or conscious memory. But sometimes it's comforting to know that, there's so much, again, there's a whole realm that we don't understand intellectually, and that part of them does know their parent intimately.
Yeah. Well, your work is so important, Hope. This is, I could just talk to you forever and ever. I'm want to ask you one last question and then more about what you've got coming up for us. Grace. So it's a word I've been asking people to share what it means to them, because Lawrence, the subtitle of the book is From Fear to Love to Grace, the title of the summit. Lawrence was working on a book and curriculum he was writing for therapists to bring more heart into addiction treatment. And he had lost his wife a few years prior to him and I moving into a relationship. And so his experience of grace was his experience of facing love and loss and all of that. And I think it's kind of a word that everyone has a different, how, back to the sensory piece, what does grace mean? It can be loaded with, logical, religious, whatever. But I'm curious, with your incredible work that you do with motherless daughters and with grief, and how would you define grace?
That's an excellent question. And I think I would have answered that question differently at different points in my story.
Mm-hmm.
But the answer I'm going to give you is the answer from 2019. It's me sitting here today, and I'm going to borrow it from someone else. Because when I heard it, I thought, this is it. This is an articulation of what I today believe grace is. Anderson Cooper recently interviewed Stephen Colbert about the death of his father and brother when he was 10 years old. Stephen Colbert's brother and father died in a commercial airplane crash when he was a kid, and Anderson Cooper's dad died when he was 10 too. And it was a really candid conversation between two men about grief and bereavement. And in that interview, Stephen Colbert talked about learning to love the thing you most wish had not happened. And I thought, that's actually the best description of grace I've heard to this point in my life.
Oh my goodness.
It's being able to embrace the saddest and hardest thing maybe that ever happened to you, the thing that you most wish had not shaped your life, and acknowledging that it did, and finding, I think, the appreciation and the gratitude for it nonetheless. That's brings us right back to what we were talking about before, which is being able to hold those two truths. More than anything in this world, I wish my mom had not suffered and died at 42 and missed out on seeing her children grow up and her grandchildren be born. And almost more than anything else in my life, I'm so grateful for what I learned and was able to turn that into for other women.
I love that. Learning to love the things we wished had not happened.
Learning to love the thing I most wish had not happened. Yeah, and to me, that is the definition of grace. I would have answered that question differently before I saw that interview. I would have answered it differently when I was 17.
Yeah.
We are all works in progress, and our relationship to our losses is changing and maturing and evolving all the time. I had this, and I'll just, if I could squeeze this in just for a moment, I had the extraordinary experience of getting to revise Motherless Daughters twice. The first time I wrote that book, I was 28 years old. My mom had died 11 years earlier. I was single. I was just starting out as a writer. I didn't know what the future would hold. I did a second edition in 2006, and by then I was married. I had 2 children. I was right on the cusp of turning my mom's age when she died. And the third edition was the 20th anniversary edition of the book. And so I was 50 when it came out. And I was well past a lot of those moments that I had been afraid of reaching and uncertain about. And I looked back at that book and I thought, I can't rewrite this book. Like, I can't write this book anymore. The person who really needed to write that book, right, was the 28-year-old and the 41-year-old. Yeah. And so I'm going to leave it all on the voice of the 41-year-old because she's still figuring things out. And I thought my relationship with the loss has changed too much for me to write the book that the majority of those women need. I need to write another book, which is why I'm writing another book now. Yeah. Now I'm writing a book that is the book about my relationship with the loss now, so far in the past. My mom died 38 years ago. And this new book is about what I call the long arc of grief. It is about how we are carrying that loss and those people with us for the rest of our lives. So what is it going to look like 20 or 30 years later? And what do we go and where do we do and how do we interpret it when it shows up after 35 or 50 years? Because bereavement centers are funded to help people in the acute phase of grief, right? For the first 2 or 3 years, maybe. If you show up and your loss is 20 years in the past, and maybe it's coming up for you in a big way for the first time, how do you understand that? Where do you find community and support? So the book is about that, and about hopefully starting to build out that kind of community and support for all of us who need it. There's 30 million adults who were under the age of 20 when a parent or sibling died. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
And it's such important work because, you know, back to the shame part again, too. I had a lot of shame because I had feelings that I didn't know what to do with. And I felt like if I could do what all the big people are telling me, then, you know, I'd be better than a better person because I'm not able to do it, but I better do it. And there was shame that came up in that.
And the big secret is that they weren't really doing it either. You know, most of them were just putting on the mask. Also, we were all walking around with masks on, pretending that this was normal, right? There was so much pretense. And I'm glad to see, you know, that those masks are coming off.
Yeah. And I can relate to what you're saying about rewriting the book, because even when I was doing the final edits of Letters to Freedom, or even if I open it up now, I'm like, what? You know, what? I was in such a different place, you know, 2 years ago when he passed away. And I'm so glad I sat down at my computer and wrote those stories. And the reason I did was because they had to go somewhere. And I was, again, not really wanting to burden my friends with too much talking about Lawrence, but all I could think about was all the synchronicity and all the things that we did. And so I just sat down and I wrote, and I look back and think, I'm so glad I did that, because I would not be able to write those stories now. I'm not there anymore, and yet it was so much a part of the experience of how I moved through the grief that I'm glad I did.
And for many creative people, especially in the absence of a supportive community, externalizing our stories and our feelings through writing, through art, through dance, through performance, right, can be enormously healing. Now, some people really are of the temperament where they just need to go inside themselves and figure it out and then come back into the world, and that's fine too. But for those of us who really need to externalize, which is often the more feminine way of coping with grief, there are many outlets. But I, you know, sit in a circle of 26 women and see how sharing stories and speaking the unspoken and supporting each other leads to such, you know, huge leaps in healing that, you know, I'm an advocate of that approach for sure, for those who want it and, you know, want or are able to avail themselves of it and believe that it will help.
Well, my big pie in the sky dream that I need $1 billion benefactors to fund is a place where people can go for 3 months. I don't know why it was after Lawrence died. I just got this hit. It's got to be 3 months. People can go out in nature somewhere where there's opportunities for all those things: music and art and dance and dream work. I work a lot with dreams, and nature and good healthy food, and it's donation only. You don't have to worry about money. Everybody's taking care of everything, and you can immerse yourself in this experience of what grief is and be held by supportive people. So I need a couple billionaires.
What a great idea. I'm so there with you. When I get $1 million that I can donate somewhere, I will donate it there. No, that's really important. You know, in other countries, not so much ours, but, you know, that give months of maternity leave, right? It's there for you to have a transitional phase into parenthood. It's for the child, of course, to be with the parents for the first couple of months, but it's also for the parents to adjust to being parents before they go back into the, you know, regular world that they inhabited before, because they're coming back into the world now changed. And the same, I wish, could be true for bereavement, that we could get 3 months of bereavement leave, you know, when a member of the immediate family dies, so that we can go somewhere and have a liminal space to make that transition slowly, so that then when we re-enter the world, and the world is, both we and our world has changed, we are able to do it, you know, with resilience and support from others who understand.
Right. It's interesting. All the work I've done with moms in the past is all about the advocacy for leave. And I think I heard someone say the other night on the news that there's a list of 2 countries that don't have maternal leave, and
Mhm.
we're one of the two. The other was like New Guinea or something. I don't want to get that wrong, but
It was someplace in the South Pacific, I believe.
he's
Yeah.
like, we need to get off that list. But you think the whole world,
Yeah.
United States is one of two. So yeah, and I never made the connection, because birth and death are really this whole cycle of birth and death, right? And we
Right.
need this time, this incubation time
Right.
to reorient ourselves to this. It's a transformation. It's a
Exactly.
birth. Death is a birth in a sense.
And that leave needs to be paid. I mean, the average American gets 3 days of paid bereavement leave.
Yeah.
What the hell, right? That's not even enough time in some cultures or religions to be able to plan a funeral and have a mourning period, which
Right.
means that you have to go without pay in order to mourn your dead, according to the,
Yeah.
the rituals or the rules of your subculture. And I think that's reprehensible.
Mhm.
It is. Certain individual companies are extending it. I know that Sheryl Sandberg was part of an initiative to get up to 2 weeks of paid leave for, I believe it was at Facebook and other companies, but I don't know, it's slow going. It's slow
Yeah.
going. And when people have to choose between paying their bills and mourning their dead, I think we've got some work to do here.
Yeah, we definitely have some work to do. And it's wonderful to connect with you. And we're both doing it. And let's keep doing
I
it.
know. I'm so glad to meet a kindred spirit doing this work.
I know. I know. Such a delight. So we'll have your website up for people to go to. Anything specific after February 4th that you want to like highlight for people?
There's an early mother loss retreat in Toronto in April that is now registering. If that means mother loss when you were up to age 21, you can be any age now. There's another one in June in Los Angeles. In July, there's a one-day workshop in St. Louis. And I'm also putting together an evening event in Des Moines, Iowa, also in July. I think that's covering right now the first half of the year, but other things may come on the calendar at any moment. So just keep checking at motherlessdaughters.com.
Okay, wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Hope. I
Thank
really
you,
enjoyed
Patti.
the conversation. And yeah, we'll continue, hopefully, on this
Okay.
journey together. Take care.
Thank you so much. And a big hello and hug to everyone watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.